Aloha and welcome into the Kaimana Intervention Podcast. My name is Tauasu Harrington and I am your host. I'm joined by Dr. Lani Taholo and by Soa Mulitalo. And we also have a guest navigator on with us, Dr. Kalei Kanuha, who we will introduce more formally in just a minute. This is podcast number 4. And so those of you who have been on this journey with us before have seen the previous podcasts. We welcome you back onto the canoe and encourage you to find your seat, get settled, get comfortable, and pick up a paddle because we're all involved in this journey. If this is your first time with us, welcome aboard. And we want to encourage you to go back and listen to the previous podcasts that we have had because they cover very important subjects and in many ways kind of set the stage as we progress towards new subjects and new topics, and having that background information that we have already covered will be incredibly beneficial as you embark on this journey with us. As you can tell, I like to kind of use the analogy of a canoe, a voyaging canoe, which is the vessel that our ancient ancestors used to go across the Pacific and to navigate and discover the many islands in the South Pacific. And in that analogy, on that journey, we have a captain of the canoe, and that is Dr. Lani Taholo PhD, LCSW, and we're so grateful to have her at the helm. We also have her first mate, Soa Mulitalo, and she is taking commands from our captain, and I am basically your steersman. I just put my oar in the water, I put my paddle in the water, and I just do whatever Captain Taholo tells first mate Mulitalo to do. And if they say go left, I go left, go right, I go right, go straight, I go straight. And so that is basically what we're looking at today. We have some traditions that have been established before we get started, before we get in the water. We come together and Dr. Taholo and First Mate Mulitalo will give us some direction, give us some instructions. We check all of our instruments and our gauges, make sure everything is running right. And so the way that we do that is we turn some time over to Dr. Taholo for the vision of the Kaimana Intervention Program.
Mahalo, Tau. Our Kaimana Intervention vision is that our work is to help people receive the Kaimana Intervention wave of a safe space where therapeutic and culturally based skills for emotional healing are practiced to not lose the me in the we, nor the power of the we, for therein lie the navigational threads of successful emotional healing.
Mahalo for that, Dr. Taholo. And First Mate Mulitalo, I'll turn the time over to you for the mission statement.
The Kaimana Intervention Mission Statement. The Kaimana Intervention podcast and group curriculum offer a Kaimana wave of culturally based skills, support, and a safe space for emotional healing with generous and humble Kaimana Intervention trained therapists and trained cultural consultants to help others see, hear, and understand themselves, their loved ones, and even their offenders above, below, and around all the noise of the world. This is the essence of navigating through emotional healing successfully while keeping your true self intact. Thanks, Tal.
Mahalo. Thank you so much for that. I love both the vision and the mission statement, and I encourage people to go back and listen to them again as we get ready to embark. But we have done all of the preliminary checks and are ready to get into the water. Before that, though, we're going to introduce our guest navigator who we have on board with us, and I'll turn the time back over to Captain Taholo for that.
Mahalo, Tau. Val Kalei Kanuha, born and raised in Hilo, Hawaii in the 1950s, is the daughter of a Kanaka Oiwi father and Nisei mother. Dr. Kanuha considers herself an indigenous, critical feminist, activist, practitioner, scholar. For almost 50 years, her practice and research have been dedicated to analyzing the impact of colonization, racism, and masculinity on gender violence in Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, LGBTQ, Mahu, and communities of color. Her current interests are focused on alternative justice interventions aimed at healing instead of punishment, restoration instead of abandonment. Kalei is teaching professor and director of the MSW program at the University of Washington School of Social Work. Each and every day, Kalei honors her mother, grandmother, and auntie, Malia Craver, for their embodiment of aloha. And I just want to personally say to Dr. Kalei Kanuha that it is such a great honor to have you and for you to share your time with us. Mahalo, Dr. Kanuha. Much aloha.
Aloha kako. Mahalo to Kaimana, to Lani and Soa, to Val, all of you for inviting me to join you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation and so happy and proud to be in community with all of you and the Kaimana intervention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanuha. So our journey today is going to be one where we will navigate the waters of and do some investigation into gender-based violence and domestic violence. Before we get into that and start asking some questions, we will kind of rotate between ourselves and ask some questions of you, Dr. Kanuha. Is there anything in it that was not mentioned in your bio that you want to maybe fill in the blanks or kind of tell us how you became interested in and involved in this particular area of social work?
That's great. Thank you for that question, Tao. You know, as you get into your seventh decade of revolving around the sun, you know, I'm in this moment of my life of reflecting on how it is that the things that are important to me are important, how I got here. So I'm really happy for that question. And I'll give you the lived experience of how I got into this work. And then I'll also share what I came to understand about why I think I got involved in the work. So first of all, you know, I say to people now that I am one of those of us, many thousands of us who are involved in this work to end child abuse, family violence, sexual assault, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, community violence. But those of us who are kind of involved in this work that seems so dark and hard and depressing, and you know, a lot of people say, "How can you do that work?" And you know, I can say that I think the reason that I was interested in this work is not because I have experienced it. So I have to say that I'm among, I would say, probably a very small group of us who've been doing this work for a very, very long time, where I say by the luck of a draw. It has nothing to do with my class background, my parents' background, anything like that. It's really luck. And you know, I always say, even after 50 years of doing this work, I never say that I would not ever be in a violent relationship. And I don't think anybody should ever say that, because you just never know the conditions under which we are faced with. None of us thought we would live through a pandemic of the extent that COVID brought into our lives across the globe. And I think there are many of us who started doing things that we never would have imagined that we would do. And so I always say that it was just the luck that I did not experience in my family growing up, in my extended family growing up, or in my personal life, any kind of intimate violence. But I just think I was lucky. I really believe that. And the reason I say that is because the reason I say that is because I was attracted to this work almost 50 years ago, because I just couldn't understand how this could happen. That's exactly what I would say. That about 50 years ago, I I had just finished my MSW in Minnesota, and on a cold wintry day, I saw this flyer on our bulletin board, and it said, "Come to a meeting about the battered wife problem." And I literally didn't even understand what that meant. Now, for those of you who aren't as old as me, if you can imagine, I came up in a time where, first of all, nobody even talked about it. It was happening and has been happening for generations, but nobody ever talked about it. And then when I saw this battered wife problem, I literally could not understand what could that be exactly, because I had never experienced it in my own relationships, and I never in my own upbringing. Now, I knew about the battered child syndrome because, I was a social worker and I was a social work student. So I remember learning about the battered child syndrome. So I thought, was that related to that? So I went to this meeting and I was just curious, like, what was this problem, And that was the beginning of my life's work. And what happened for me is to be in community with childcare workers, family counselors, some with MSWs, some with marriage and family therapy degrees, legal aid attorneys, chemical dependency, we call it then, drug abuse and substance abuse program counselors. But these are people from all different walks of life and work that had come together to talk about clients and friends and neighbors who were reporting having been abused by their intimate partners, husbands, boyfriends. And I literally was sitting in this room with all of these inspiring people who have become, really, I would say, the stewards of this work over all these years, many who have passed on, as a matter of fact. It's been so long. And I was so inspired by the passion, the dedication, and the concern we all had for victims and for communities, for families. And that's how I came into this work. And so when I came to the work, first of all, no one talked about this issue. There were no shelters anywhere in the United States. There were no laws against abusing your partner. And so all of the things that now everybody kind of takes for granted, like, if this happens, go to a shelter. You can actually say that and people know what you're talking about. There were no shelters when I started at that one meeting, right? And so much has happened in the last 50 years, much of it very positive and much of it not that great. And that's why I'm now involved in work that does not focus on involvement of prisons and jails and probation and courts to try to heal from this, but to really look at what it is that we need to do in communities to build up and to restore and to care for our communities so that our families can also thrive and heal from the trauma that they've experienced, which I know you all know very well at Kaimana. So now coming full circle to why I think I've been involved in this work, I came to understand after living on the continental US for about 20 years, and then I came home. I remember saying, and when I first met Auntie Malia Craver, who has been a very important person in terms of bringing back after Tutupukui the practice of Ho'oponopono and making it accessible, right, to everybody. That you don't have to go to a counselor or social worker to practice Ho'oponopono. You can learn to do it in your own families, and that's what we're hoping for, is that Ho'oponopono thrives in every family and in every community. So what happened is I said, I'm not sure why I came home, because I wasn't exactly planning to come home. And Auntie said, well, it wasn't your decision. You were called home by your kupuna and your ancestors, by those you don't even know. But we feel like you needed to come home, and so we called you home, and that's why you're here. And I think that's the same reason that I'm involved in this work. I think that, having not been a victim or witness of intimate violence in my growing up or in my adult relationship is part of the reason that I can see the depth and the complexity of these issues, because I don't come at it in terms of my own healing. I'm healing, as all of us are, from colonization, from global capitalism, from imperialism, from racism. But I'm not healing from having been a victim or witness of intimate violence. And I think this is part of why my ancestors have put this work before me. And how am I able to do it all these years? I think my ancestors have placed a path before me and are watching over me so that I can do the work. So that's a long answer to a story that has been a long journey for me, which will be, it's about 48 years. So in a couple of years, it'll be 50, but it's been a long time. And I think I'm doing this because this is what my ancestors want for me. So mahalo for that question, Tal.
Thank you so much for that answer. I want to invite Dr. Taholo to comment on your journey and maybe give us a little bit. This is a wonderful opportunity for Dr. Taholo to mention a little bit why she's involved in this work. And I love your perspective, Dr. Kanuha, and for you to have been around when there were no shelters, where there was no law on the books that made it illegal for you to raise a hand to your partner, and to see how far we have come. And I just want to say, and I'm sure that Dr. Taholo will echo this, but there are few people who have done as much work in this area, in particular, in general, but in particular for our people, than you have. And so we are so grateful to you. With that, I'll turn some time over to Dr. Taholo.
Mahalo Tau. Kalei, it's such an honor to hear your story. And it very much, I had some past situations in my life where I had been a survivor of some of these things. However, I really connect with your call back home, that your ancestors had called you and that you just somehow, you paid attention to that and you followed it. And I just want to say congratulations, because look to where this has led you and the rest of us in really paying attention to gender-based violence that has happened as very much so in transition, as there's been a diaspora, right, of our people moving from the islands, and also the colonization and the effects of racism and all of those pieces that have happened and continue to happen to this day. I want to say that I am so intrigued with you as a person and with your research. One of the things that I really want to bring out, because this was such a gripping moment for me when I was coding the work that I had recorded to compose the dissertation and work, and it was your work around the sanctity of our roles as women, and also our work in the community, our work with youth, our work with the children, our work with our partners, as we work with partners, as we work with males as well, that we have this, there is this sanctity of our role. And I just wanted to really acknowledge that piece and give this back to you and join with you, together with the Kaimana research from the dissertation, that really having it come from the mouths of those who have actually gone through this was, there are no words. You try to put it down on paper and you try to put that into dissertation and publications, and even when you go to present. But it would be such an honor to hear from your own being what that sanctity of our role is, and what you found in your own research in terms of that sanctity. I would love to give that time back to you. Thank you, Kalei.
Thank you, Lani. Well, I would say that because you remember that I started off so long ago when there wasn't anything, right? And in a way, you know, what we did was we listened very, very closely to survivors. And many of us who started this work were also survivors, including that some of us had our, we may not personally have been in abusive relationships, but our mothers were, our grandmothers were, our aunties were. And so this is such a common issue, I mean, unfortunately, it is a very, very common issue across all families, no matter if you're rich or poor, you are immigrant or American citizen. I mean, no matter what you are, where you're from, this is a very common problem across all nations and all peoples. So, I think for me, coming up in the time that I did, which was as a young feminist in my 20s, right? And so I came up also at a time when the women's movement, at least in the United States, maybe not so much in Hawaii yet, but in the United States, the modern day feminist movement, because I'm going to go back to this idea of sanctity, which is very traditional. So in some ways, I would say we predated the feminist movement, the women's movement, right? But that's true of a lot of indigenous peoples, which is the holding up of the female, right? The Hina, the moon. And so part of coming up in that environment really helped me focus on the lived experience and the stories that at that time was mainly women, right? We know now that this happens in gay couples, it happens in lesbian couples. Mahu are very, very subject to this, and this is all because of discrimination too, right? And fear of difference, and in some ways that is at the core of why this problem occurs. But what happened is, with that focus on the lived experience of survivors at that time, and I would say still probably the focus on women as victims and survivors was both intriguing and sad and challenging, because we also know that the female in family and community life is so important. Women and mothers do so much. They work so hard. They are survivors and are caregivers, right, of not only the current generation, but every generation before and after. So in some ways, the idea of the strength of the female and the strength of women in society is contradicted by why it is that these very sacred, strong, empowering, caregiving roles of the female becomes relegated to those who are most often abused in their relationships. So what happened is that in listening to these stories, we came to understand that in fact the strength and the importance of the female in all cultures has created and accentuated the gender role differences, right? And so what happens is, in many situations of gender-based violence, it's what I would say now is the threat of the strength that the female and women and girls have in the family that makes it difficult in a lot of situations for men to feel like they can honor and respect and hold up the female, because there's a little bit of threat about that. The kids like the mom better than the dad. The mom does all these things that they get rewarded for, and dads don't. So there have been, ways that unspoken, there have been ways that we have held up the gender role of the male in comparison to the female. Men are physically stronger. Men go out and earn money. Men are the caretakers of the family. And so there's a way that the male gender roles have been accentuated and placed as more important than that of the female. And that in some ways, I have to say, is part of modern day, and I would say Haole, modern day white Haole feminism has said that women have to be held up because of patriarchy, women have been put down. And however, if you look at, and I'll say our Hawaiian culture in particular, I remember when I went home and I met with Auntie Ulu Kanakaole Garmin. And I said, you know, Auntie, one of the things we've been doing in the gender violence field is that we're replacing violence with equality. That what we want is there to be equality in relationships. And violence occurs when one member of the family, usually the father, decides that they're more important than the mother, or they're more important as the husband versus their wives. And so I'm just wondering, Auntie, what is the concept of equality in Hawaiian culture? And Auntie Ulu said, well, there's no such word as equality in Hawaiian culture. We don't have equality. What we have is lokahi. We have balance. Nobody's better than anybody else. Nobody's stronger than anybody else. Nobody's more valuable than anybody else. And in fact, equality would never work. You don't want children to be equal to kupuna. They aren't. And it's not because there's something wrong with them. Children have a particular role in society, as do kupuna, as do the makua wahine. And so everybody in society has a particular role. And what is our goal in Hawaiian society? Lokahi, balance, right? Everybody fulfills a role. Nobody is more important than the other. And this idea of lokahi really helped me to reinstate that we have lost the value of the female. We have lost the respect and the sacredness of the female. And I think in my work with men who have been hurtful and abusive to their partners, when I talk about the sanctity and the sacredness of the female, and I say the female because it's not necessarily women or girls or whatever, but it's the female because it's the female, the Hina and the moon, that those are emblematic of how important the female is, right? Because the moon is what sets in motion the tides, and the cosmos is really ruled by the moon, right? And the moon is a white, pure, sacred, powerful place. And in some ways, you know, people say like, why do we have all these bad associations with the night, right? But the night is when the moon comes out. And so I think there's been a way that we've said the darkness and night is a bad thing, right? I mean, think about that. It's black. So we don't like black things. We don't like, you know, black animals. We don't like black people, right? We have a thing about blackness, but blackness is where creation happens because it is in the night when creation happens. Why? Because the night is a time of the moon, and it's a time of the female. So these are teachings that I kind of learned in our Hawaiian intervention, right? In intervening with Hawaiian men who were harmful to their partners and Hawaiian women who were victimized by their partners. And when I taught them about the sanctity of the female in Hawaiian culture, both men and women were like, wow, I never know about that, right? And so when you kind of remember, it's like, and then of course we say, there would be no men if women didn't give birth to you, right? So I always said, like, your wife gave birth to your child. You cannot do that, but she can do that. Your mother gave birth to you, and your father couldn't do that. Your mother is the one who could do that. So the continuation of our race and our people is in the body, literally in the body of the female. So how can you want to hurt and destroy and tear down and defame and call the women not valuable and call your partner not valuable? Tell your girls, like, you're not as good at things as my son. I value my son. I don't really value you as much because you're a girl. You wahine, I don't value you so much. So when we start teaching about the value, and it's like real simple, like you wouldn't be here if it weren't for your mother. Then all of a sudden the guys are like, wow, I never really thought about that, right? So it's really kind of talking about and bringing back that in all of our indigenous cultures, every culture holds up the female. But it is in colonization that we've been influenced by white colonization and about doing away with the things that were so ancient and traditional to us, that we've said that equality is what we want. We want men and women to be same. And I came to understand that I've been practicing that way for a long time, the same thing, when really what it is about balance, not same, right? Difference and balance. So that's how I feel like I came to that after I came home. So I think I was called home by my ancestors, by my kupuna, but I think I needed to come home to regain those things that I didn't even know myself, and to pass those things on to our generations to come. So mahalo for that, buddy.
So beautiful. Mahalo. Mahalo, Kalei.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to just kind of let us freestyle here. We have some questions that we have, but there's so much here that I'm really fascinated by and interested in. I'm also interested in Soa's perspective as the youngest of our group. Can she relate? Soa, do you feel like you can relate to some of these perspectives where this equality thing is being pushed, and really that's not solving the problem. That's not. You can get equality and you can have men and women in the military and put the women on the front line, but that in a lot of ways doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, so how do you feel, Soa, in your experience as far as whether or not equality makes sense, or this ancient concept of lokahi resonates more? Go ahead and unmute and give us some feedback.
Yeah, so this is a really deep conversation. And I wish, I was a little bit more prepared. Just there's a lot going on in my head, but just from the generation, especially my generation and the younger folks, what I'm hearing is this push for equality all around. And for me personally, I had a hard time with that, because I know that within my own culture, within my own identity, there are certain roles to be played. So just like what Dr. Kanuha was saying, is that we have these roles. There is a role for youth and children and adolescents versus, with the elderly. And so it makes more sense with Dr. Kanuha's explanation of lokahi, of balance, not equality. Because if everything was equal, I can't come up with a specific example, but I can see where we would have conflicts. Lokahi just resonates with me and my soul, and understanding my role and my lived experience here. But something that I kept thinking as Dr. Kanuha and Dr. Taholo was talking was like having that access to the old knowledge, to the kupuna that have these very valuable like wisdom of our people and our traditions. And me being born in the diaspora where, I've been disconnected from that wisdom, that knowledge. And even my grandma or my grandparents, they don't really practice that because of colonization. So I have to seek it elsewhere. And so this is the place where I'm here, just learning, taking notes. And I'm just so grateful for the work that has been done by Dr. Kanuha and Dr. Taholo in bringing to light these concepts that is, it's familiar to me, my spirit. It makes sense when she was describing it. But still a little foreign because I've been here in the United States and that's not what I've been surrounded by or have access to regularly. So yeah, I'm just grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll add a perspective as I'm a twin, okay, and it's an interesting thing to be a twin. But the reason why, and so my twin brother's name is Alema. Alema is he's a broadcaster. He spends a lot of time in front of the camera. I spend a lot of I'm not on camera very often. I spend a lot of time behind the camera, and the beauty of that is that our skill sets are complementary. They're not identical, and identical is it's not good. You don't, if you think of it in the team perspective, you don't need a whole bunch of quarterbacks. You need some offensive linemen and you need some receivers, and you need some guys that play defense. If you're to have everybody be equal, everybody's the quarterback, that team is they're never going to win a game. And so it's a beautiful thing that you are describing, and that same concept. We talk about the lokahi wheel in the Kaimana intervention curriculum. But our world, as I love, how the Hina is the moon, and our world is built this way. Our world is not built with everything is equal. That is the beauty of it, is the diversity of it all, right? And you have the mountains and you have the ocean. You have the Aina and you have the Moana. So it's the yin and yang. And so I think as we talk more about it and we introduce these ideas, then they will resonate with us naturally. Did you have any thoughts, Dr. Taholo?
Yes, thank you, Cal. Yes, I was taking everything in that Kalei was sharing, and when you talked about the Hina and at night and the power of that, and the power of creation, that is embodied in her. She is the moon. I recently heard from a therapist, I'm just tired of all of this diversity stuff. I think it's overdone. I think people talk about the need for diversity, and she said I agree in some sense. I see the purpose of that, but she said I think it's overplayed, and I think what you were striking and hitting upon, Kalei, is really this, if you will, eternal universal concept that um, diversity is about being complementary, that complementary is diversity, that the reason why they may hear Black Lives Matter, and then there's been that White Lives Matter, all of the push and everything in between, is because the voices are striving for some sense of equality, but that's where we can easily go down a rabbit hole and get lost. What Auntie said to you was exactly right, that our elders knew that is a rabbit hole. Don't even go down that rabbit hole of equality. The what our kupuna say is exactly what you shared. It is this whole concept of lo kahi, balance, harmony. Therein lies truly the beauty of diversity. And I want to be able to share with all those that are practitioners as well, and is truly open your heart and your mind to what Dr. Kalei Kanuha is sharing with us this very moment. That if you understand the beauty of the concept of being complementary, then you begin to grasp the deeper and broader and more universal effects of harmony and balance, so that we're not pushing for equality and getting lost down that rabbit hole, it's not something we can say, I'm tired of it. That's like saying, I'm tired, really, just after listening to what you shared with us, Kalei. That means I'm tired of harmony. I'm tired of being in balance, which is really contradictory to what you are honestly sharing. And if we truly understood this, and along with what Soa was saying, as our young person, young adult here in our conversation, that she shared, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Soa, that this is not in her ears enough. She's not surrounded by this kind of language. She's not surrounded by this kind of discussion. She's not surrounded by this kind of talk story every day, day in, day out, day in, day out. And I believe, and I want to share with all of you, and through what Dr. Kanuha is sharing, it was at night when I had one of my most precious dreams, and I was lost. This was last year, I believe it was. So I'm dreaming it's at night, and I'm lost, and I'm realizing I'm in a foreign land, and there's enough around me to realize that I'm in the Orient. So I'm feeling like I'm somewhere in China. Now my grandmother, my maternal grandmother is from Canton village in China. So I'm starting to have these visions, but I'm looking for something that feels familiar. I finally come up to a home, and the door is open, but the screen is closed. I open the screen, and there is all of this beautiful, ornately decorated room with all of our cultural, beautiful ornaments. It's just so difficult to understand, but the colors were brilliant. It filled the room. It brought me feelings of peace and just this unlimited feeling of satisfaction. And I walked into the room, and there was my paternal grandmother, Anaseni Takipota Moipeo Katoa, who raised us. Our paternal grandmother, she was laying in bed softly asleep, and I was able to crawl under the blanket with Grandma Takipo, and I knew that I was home. I knew that I was safe. And it was her teachings on a daily basis where she would speak of these things. She would talk of these things. It filled our lives on a daily basis. And I'm listening to Soa, and it's hard for me to listen to because I want so much for Soa and our young people to have that again in their lives on a daily basis. The stories, to talk story, to make sure this happens. Create space on a daily basis in your lives to create this lokahi, to create this balance, this harmony, this complementary, these pieces, this that fills the void and helps us to remember who we truly are. This is what fills us. And I want to thank you, Kalei, for bringing us back to who we truly are. Because listening to your words and just your voice, it's not just your words, I want you to know, it's your presence, it's your voice, it's who you are that you bring to this. And it's filling my soul right now, just retelling that story that happened at night. And of course it was being in the Hina, with the Hina, being Hina and being there at night and receiving that. It was more like a vision, not a dream. I have to say that. I'm going to call it a vision. It was a vision of during the night when the moon was up. So mahalo.
Mahalo, mahalo.
Yeah,
Was
thank you for
just
sharing that. Um, I really just want to sit at your knees, Dr. Kanuha, and just let you be the kumu and there's so many things that I'm sure that you have discovered that that need to be heard. And so I'm going to just turn some time over to you. You've mentioned that this balance and the lokahi, the hina, in this effort to try and overcome some of the things that have occurred as a result. And I can't overemphasize the importance of understanding colonization and the impact that it has had on our families within our cultures. And when we speak of the behavior of men who feel threatened by perhaps a female who is more popular or is more powerful, that is the natural reaction to something that has already happened to them in the colonization process. And it's in all of the oppressive and there is this process of brainwashing people and indoctrinating people into when you colonize them. That same playbook is adapted by the oppressor within a relationship, right? And that is learned in that whole colonialization process. And one of the tools that is used in there is this thing called gaslighting. And but I really am interested in your just sharing with us what has been successful in the attempts that you have pulled from ancient culture that you have found has been successful in overcoming some of these you know we lose touch with our culture and who we really were and who we are. So I'm sorry if that's a little convoluted, but please just take as much time as you want in the time that we have left to share with us what you feel is most important for us to hear.
well, mahalo, mahalo, Tal, and all of you. It's just really quite an honor to be here and to share together. And I want to just kind of talk about this thing about balance versus equality, because one thing about when people say why does this happen, and why is there abuse in relationships, and there are a couple of things about that. And so first of all, and I know a lot of people will think this is really simplistic, but it's not to me. It really isn't. And that is that I think all of us suffer from the effects of capitalism, of globalization, of definitely colonization, but all of these forces, right, historical forces, that it hasn't been like a few years, it's been like a few hundreds of years, right? So this is something that is so ingrained in us, that there are so many things that all of us all over the world, all humans, have been influenced by what I would consider to be negative, hurtful, destructive forces, right? And the forces are not only like how our parents might treat us, or our neighbors treat us, or a teacher treats us, or the Catholic Church has now documented hundreds of thousands of children who have been sexually assaulted by the brothers in the church, right? And of course, now we know about the Boy Scouts. There are hundreds of thousands of scouts, children, boys who were abused by scouting leaders, right? So we have to think now, this is not one bad apple. This is not about the bad apples, right? This is about a society that's created systems of abusing others that are perceived to be less valuable, less important, less powerful, less meaningful, less contributory. But there's a way, right, that society has said there's the haves and the have-nots. There's the one who have power and the one who don't have power. There's the ones who do important things and those who do not so important things. There's the smart ones and the dumb ones. You know, there's this way that we've codified and structured that there's some that are better than others, right? So turning around a system of hierarchy to one of balance is very, very, very difficult, right? So when people say like, oh, Kalei, that sounds so good, but really? You think you can train all of these partners? Because we know, I've worked with gay men who have been charged with abusing their partners. I've also worked with lesbians who have abused their women partners, right? So, and I've also worked with the victims of those in those relationships too. And you know what? The dynamics are exactly the same, which is somebody is socialized that it's okay to defame, to disrespect, to use your hand, to use your words, to put somebody down, you know, the gaslighting. This is part of the dynamic. And if that gaslighting doesn't work, then I'm going to use this. You know, if that doesn't work, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this. I'm going to use something to get rid of you because you're bothering me. So we have set up a culture all over the world where there's a value placed on some and not others. And as long as that is true, this is always going to be a problem in our society, right? I mean, it's like, why is the CEO paid so much more than those who are delivering all those packages for Amazon, right? He's among, Jeff Bezos is among the rich. He's more rich than like some countries. One guy, more rich than plenty countries around the world, right? And what about all those workers who have repeated injuries from taping all our boxes together and throwing them on delivery trucks? I mean, those people are not among the richest people in the world. We know that, right? So we have done something that says it's all right to treat people badly because we don't value everyone. We only value some over others. And so to me, this is the easiest answer to explain how it is that domestic violence happens. That this is what I say. Whenever you hear about domestic violence, people always say, why does she stay? Why didn't she just leave? Why didn't she just get out of it? When somebody's sexually assaulted, we always say to the victim, well, why were you dressed like that? Why did you get drunk and go out with that guy? Why did you take a ride with somebody you don't even know? You met him at the bar. We always are there to blame the victims, right? And why? They're not so important, right? So it's easier to blame victims and blame those who are harmed than it is to say, why would you slap and kick and throw your girlfriend out of the car? Why would you do something like that? And in front of the children. We don't say that. We say, why didn't she leave? Right? So we have this thing about saying, you already are less than the person who harmed you. And now you're really less because you didn't leave that relationship. Right? You're already less because you were raped. And now we're going to make you feel worse by saying, why did you allow that to happen? Why didn't you leave? Why did you get drunk? Why did you go out with somebody you don't even know? Right? So instead of saying, why would you treat another human being like that? And this is where balance comes into play, right? And then if we said you would never harm somebody who you didn't know, you wouldn't force sex on somebody if they said, stop, don't do that, right? And so to me, why this is such an intransigent problem and very, very hard to deal with is that we want somebody to be blamed. And so if we don't blame the victim, then we're going to blame the one who harmed them, the offender, perpetrator, abuser, whatever you want to call them. And then we're going to say, let's put them in jail because they were so bad for doing that. Let's put them in jail. That's really not that much better. Because what does jail do and prisons do? It trains you. It's a training school for learning how to do more bad things and how to treat people terribly, right? So we're not living the values of humanity, of care, of aloha, of hope, of wanting and believing that people can be different. We aren't living those things. We want somebody to blame. And if we can't blame that one, we're going to blame somebody else, right? So to me, this is why the problem of domestic violence in particular is very difficult to change, because we're still living with a colonized mind and a colonized heart, right? So even with, with the men that I've worked with, some of them say, well, if you were married to my wife, you could see why I hit her. And I'd say, really? So let's line you up with a lot of different women and see if you were to treat all of them differently than your wife. And then let's talk about that, right? But there's somehow, it's like, she's so bad that you would be whacking her too. It's like, okay, let's talk about why. And I say, would you whack your grandmother? Would you whack your child? Oh, no, of course not. Then why would you think it's okay to whack the mother of your children, the daughter of parents, right? The granddaughter of a kupuna? That's what you've made a choice to do. Why don't we just talk about that one? Because you don't do that to everybody. Did you punch out the police officer who came to arrest you? No? Why not? So there's this thing about how it's not my fault I did it. It's that other person's fault for making me do it, right? And if that person would only stop acting that way, I wouldn't call them names. I wouldn't put them down. I wouldn't push them out of the car. I wouldn't take the car keys and make them stay at home. I wouldn't ask for all the money. I wouldn't do those things. It's about that person. They're making me do it. So part of what we try to do is to say, you're hurting too. You're hurting too. Because it's out of that pain in yourself that you're hurting and causing pain to others is what you know. It's the only thing that you know. And I think, Kaimana, you folks know this about trauma, right? The trauma begets trauma. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. And I don't mean trauma like that you might not have been a victim of domestic violence, but you're a victim of society. And society is filled with racism and filled with images that some are less than others. And so we're trying to re-socialize people. That's really what this is about, right? To re-socialize people. And, the last thing I'll say is that, so my work now is really to bring people back to ways, and I would say ancient ways, especially for our people, our Polynesian people. These are things that we don't even know, I mean, these are teachings that we don't even know. Like, I'll just leave with this one thing, and then I'm interested in your thoughts about this. So in this lesson that we do in our Namele Huapono curriculum, we have this lesson on gender roles, yeah? And then, so I talk about the female and the sacred female of the female. But the other thing I do is I talk about all of the monarchy and all of the women who were monarchs, right? And you realize, like, everybody knows Kalakaua and everybody knows Kamehameha, but we don't know so many of the Wahine royalty, yeah? And so I talk about those things, but here's the easiest thing for when I tell people this, they're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. All of the royal trusts, everything from Queen's Hospital to our elders' home, to, of course, Kamehameha schools, these were all endowed by the Wahine. It wasn't by the kings. It wasn't by them. It was by the Wahine, right? So everything that we have done that Lili Okalani's Children's Center and the trust, Kapi'olani Hospital for Children, these were endowed by the female, the Wahine in our culture. It wasn't by the kings, it was by the Wahine, yeah? So when I say, think about how many things do you know that were formed to benefit our people and the longevity of our people, from keiki to kupuna. And people name things, and I say, you see the name in that? Kapi'olani, Liliokalani, right? Bishop Estate. These are all the women who gave to us, right? So that's my modern day part of the women are sacred lesson. which is we were always sacred. And even in modern times, even with colonization, even living under a monarchical system of a British ruling system, still the Wahine gave to the people and took care of our people. And so that reminds you that we are still sacred and should be treated that way. And it's not that, and this is the other part, I'm still gonna say this thing. So when people say, Black Lives Matter, well, white lives matter too. It's not like that equal. Making white lives matter and Black lives matter same, that is not the solution to the problem. Why are we saying Black lives matter? Is because you haven't valued Black lives, right? And why are we saying you have to hold up women? It doesn't mean put men down. It means hold everybody up, right? So there's somehow it's kind of like, well, if you're gonna, stand up for Black lives, then it means white people are gonna go down. No. If you hold up women, it means men have to go down. No. It means we treat everybody with honor, respect, kindness, and aloha. So when we're trying to say these things, we're trying to write. Yeah. So the ship little bit tipped to one side, the thing cannot get too far if the canoe a little bit tipped to one side. We're just trying to put the canoe in balance, right? I always think of the outrigger as a perfect metaphor for lokahi, because it's like you don't even have to remind the paddlers to like balance, because the outrigger is there to help you balance, right? Why do we have our canoes designed as they do? Because it doesn't, you don't have to have the skill of the navigator and the sailor. The boat is designed to keep you more in balance, right? So to me, that's what our people knew, which is sometimes, we defeat our own selves, yeah? We make things worse for ourselves. So sometimes our kupuna built in things. Why did we have ahupua'a? Because if we weren't reminded, mountain to moana, we would just be like, stay in one place. And then we'd run out of food and was like, oh, wow, now what are we going to do? It's all sacred. The whole ahupua'a, from mountains to the moana, all sacred. But you got to take care of all of it, yeah? One is not more important than the other. It's all important. And this is, I think, what we want to reinstill in people, is a respect and a love for our land, for our people, our community, but really for our histories, And I believe this is true of all people, not only Hawaiians. All people have this, and not only Polynesians. But we've just, lost track, yeah. So,
Mahalo, Kalei. I really wanted to, just beautiful, everything that you shared, so powerful. And I very much thought of exactly what you were saying about the outrigger. So in metaphorical fashion, if the goal was to be equal, then that would mean in an outrigger canoe that if someone was off, in order for everyone else to be equal with the oarsman that's off, everyone else would be off, and you would never achieve that balance. So for us as Pacific Islanders, the goal is the balance. Regardless of, it's everyone plays their role, we complement each other, we gain that momentum in order to move forward. But it only happens when we gain that low kahi versus the equality, and to not go down that rabbit hole and get lost in that. So a lot of wisdom coming from Dr. Kalei Kanuha today, and it's been such an honor. And I also want to share that the green that you're wearing, and beautiful, striking with the black, and also the green valleys of our islands, so striking, because and it was green that I wanted to wear today too, because the growth of this kind of knowledge, if we will again create space in our lives on a daily basis to listen and to hear and understand these things, and to share it wherever we're at with whoever we're at, especially our families and our communities, this will carry forward. This is the green, this is the growth. And your presence is a a huge piece of this growth as we grow in this Kaimana intervention podcast, and also together with your work. I know that in January we will have several groups that we will begin for the Kaimana intervention. We are also looking to begin with groups in the summer of 2023 with another grant that we are, I'd like to say, working together with Dr. Kanuha on, together with Soa and Tau. So we are looking forward to announcing this further. Also, please be sure to look at our kaimanaintervention.com website, because we will have those posted. But such an honor. Thank you. Mahalo. Much aloha to you. Thank you. Mahalo. Thank you, Tau.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kanuha. We didn't hear as much as we wanted to from Soa today, and we could do another hour. We could. This is one of those episodes week where we could have a second part 2 on this. But I think what's so important, as Dr. Taholo has just mentioned, just to know where you can access this information, and the outlets are limited at this time. And is there any place specifically, Dr. Kanuha, where people can get a hold of you or get more of the things that you're sharing in your program?
Well, you know what I would say, and I think, you know, this is really in terms of Hawaiian culture. I would tell people to start with Nana Ike Kumu, right? There's volume 1 and 2 that was written in the 70s, and then volume 3. I was really honored to write volume 3 with Auntie Lynette Paglinawan, Richard Paglinawan, and Dennis Kaupu. So I think, you know, those are really good resources, and they'll talk about some of these things that we're talking about now. And I think that's a really good starting point. And then people can also email me at the University of Washington, which is just my last name, kanuha@uw.edu. kanuha@uw.edu. Or you can just kind of contact all you folks, and, you know, all the hosts of Kaimana, and they have my contact information. Mahalo so much for having me.
Thank you so much for making yourself accessible and available, and for sharing your mana'o with us today. We'd like to close with a final just a word from Dr. Taholo to encourage us to do our homework. Are you prepared to do that?
Sure, sure.
With just some closing thoughts. Yeah, I want to just say one thing. So as you mentioned the canoe, it's interesting that the voyaging canoe that we use to go long distances is double hull. It's a double hull canoe. It's not even with an outrigger arm. There are 2 that go side by side, and they are in harmony with one another. And when we're going to go far and we need that stability, we have those 2 hulls. So I'll close with that. Turn the time over to Dr. Taholo for our closing words.
Beautiful. Together with the spirit that Dr. Kalei Kanuha brought with us tonight, and together we want to say, ask the hard questions, do your homework, and have an open heart and an open mind to those things that come to you. And then don't forget to move out of your own way as you watch yourself grow, as you continue in this beautiful work. We love you. We support you. Much aloha, and much aloha to you, Dr. Kalei Kanuha.
Thank you. Aloha. We'll
Aloha.
see you guys next time for the next